Hey everybody, how's it going? After a little brief summer hiatus, the Tatiana Show is back this week, and we have two wonderful guests. I hope you all enjoyed the rest of your summer, and we're back on schedule with B, also known as Brennan, from getclef.com, which is a really weird, innovative way to get people to be able to not have to remember their passwords, which is the bane of my existence personally. So B, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Cool. So why don't you explain to people a little bit about your background and what exactly Clef is doing?
Yeah, so um, my background, I used to be a developer. I've worked on a bunch of mobile stuff in particular, but a couple of years ago started thinking about the way that our phones could uh, help solve some big problems on the internet that were really different from the way computers, like the old version of computers, could solve them. In particular, thinking about how our phones being really personal could help make security easier on the web. So Clef is like the outcome of a lot of thinking around that. But what we've built with Clef is a complete replacement for usernames and passwords. We've taken sort of the best cryptography that developers use and is sort of standard for really secure applications, and wrapped it in really friendly design in a mobile app and made it really simple for anyone to use. So sort of like the best security taken in a way that everyone can use to make security more accessible. So it's like the safest way you could log into something, but it also doesn't require you to remember a username and password, and it's really easy. So walk up to any computer, hold your phone up to the screen, and you're logged in instantly, which is pretty cool.
Can you explain a little bit how that works, though? I mean, there's some sort of a squiggly line thing that goes on, and don't you have to log into Clef the first time before you can log into all your other sites?
Well, so the way it works is we use something called the Clef wave, which is the squiggly line. And that's basically, we use the phone's camera and the wave on your computer to match up so that we can sync. So when you go to a website that uses Clef, you click the Login with Clef button. Instead of a username and password field, you see the wave. If you open the app on your phone, it's going to see a similar wave. You match them up, and you log in. It's a little bit like describing it in words is like a little bit weird sounding, but it's like a really it's really interesting interaction. You know, when you actually match up the lines, it feels really sort of like right. In terms of using it the first time, so when websites integrate Clef, you can usually sign up with Clef, which means the first time you log in, you hold your phone up, and you've created an account with that site. It'll ask, can the site have your email or your first name, which information we keep and will pass to the website with your permission. And then your account is set up and you can use Clef forever. If you already have an account with the website, what usually needs to happen is you log in the old way, go to their settings, enable Clef, and then it'll start working.
But you need to have your login to Clef memorized. I think it's a 4-digit number or something like that, if I remember.
Yeah, so on the phone we keep Clef protected either with your fingerprint with Touch ID if you have an iPhone, or with a 4-digit PIN. Android phones all have the PIN right now. And basically that's so that if you lose the phone, if it's like you leave it in a cab, you don't lose access to all your accounts. It gives you enough time to report it lost or stolen, just like a credit card.
I feel like I have a follow-up question to that, but I'm not really sure what it is because it's all a little bit unusual. So it's sort of like a LastPass in the way that you would log in at first?
So LastPass is a way to keep all of your passwords stored in one place, and then when you go to a website, it grabs that password and sends it to the site. The problem with password managers is that they only solve one little piece of the password problem. Passwords are an issue because A, they're really annoying to remember and type, and password managers help that. You don't have to remember them and you don't have to type them. But they also then need to get sent to the website, and if they're ever caught somewhere in the middle, then that means that you've lost access, lost that account, if someone intercepts the message. And then it also needs to be stored by the website. And there are all these ways that websites can make storing passwords better, but every time there's a breach, we see like the website didn't do it. So the newest one is Ashley Madison leaked all their passwords. And it turned out they didn't do all the stuff you're supposed to do to save passwords. And so now all of those accounts are completely compromised. And if you use that same password on different accounts for different websites, they're also compromised. So like the password problem is big, like not just from a user perspective, but from the whole life cycle of like identifying a user. And a password manager only solves a little piece of it. And it really only solves it for like really power users, which like, you know, if you can set up a password manager, you should, but most people don't. And so what Clef does is actually like replace the entire system with public and private key cryptography, which most parts of the internet people don't know that much about, but in the Bitcoin area, like in Bitcoin, most people do understand crypto. But the idea is that the public key is the only thing that a website keeps a copy of. And that means that even if they're compromised and even if someone's intercepting your messages, they still don't break into the account. They still can't log in as you. And so your account's totally safe.
Okay. Yeah, I don't understand what any of that means, but I'll take your word for it.
Sorry.
So how long have you been doing the company for?
Yeah, so we launched publicly in June of 2013. We had been working on it for a little bit before that, but so it's been more than 2 years that we've been sort of out in the market. There are a little over 100,000 sites that use Clef today for their login.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I'm proud of that number. And the way we've grown is really to go after like communities where like we solve a problem really well. Instead of trying to get like everyone in the world to download the Clef app and use it on one site, we try to go somewhere where like we solve a problem really well and we can get density. So lately, a lot of cryptography or cryptocurrency sites, so Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency sites, have been integrating Clef, and that's really exciting for us because if you're logging into an exchange, it's also likely that you have a wallet, and it's also likely that you're testing out some of the Crypto 2.0 companies. And so if we can make Clef useful on all 4 of those accounts, then it's going to be way more interesting for you than if you could only use it on one.
Okay. So how do people protect their anonymity? Is that possible with Clef?
Yeah, so the general idea of Clef is to create, like, to let people own their own data so that, like, websites don't need to keep copies of it for everything we do. So in general, I think that this is an important tool on the way to real online anonymity. That said, on the way there, like, we still see a lot of like where people are logging in. Like, we are managing the sort of routing. So I would say that as we move to more decentralized like versions of Clef and sort of letting people do more of the work, or letting websites do more of the work themselves as opposed to depending on Clef, this is a tool for anonymity, but we think of it as like a path, like it's building blocks, and we're not at the point where it's fully anonymous today, but we're building towards that.
Do you think it's sketchy to have somebody's password associated with Clef, or with anything for that matter? Because I know when the iPhone came out and they had the fingerprinting, I was really freaked out by that. I was like, why do they need my fingerprints? And I guess maybe if that was hacked, wouldn't that almost be worse? You know, somebody's fingerprint would be even more invasive to have stolen than just their name and their address or something like that.
Totally, and it's a super interesting and important thing in security. So one thing for us is that Clef never sees your private key or any of your passwords. Like, we're not holding anything valuable. If Clef was breached and someone stole everything we had, there wouldn't be any like user data that would be private or sensitive or damaging. And we, like, not only could an attacker never see that, but we never see that. Like, we're not capable of getting that information. When we talk about the fingerprint, one of the things that we think about a lot is biometric authentication. Like, can we be using our irises and our fingerprints and our, you know, all these sort of inherent things about us to identify ourselves in the future? And the question is exactly the one you're asking. So if Facebook keeps a copy of every one of our fingerprints and someone gets into Facebook and steals them, it's really hard to get new ones. Like, it's expensive surgery to get a new set of these. So what Apple did with the iPhone was say, okay, Apple, like we will never see your fingerprints, but we're going to keep a copy on your phone. And that means that every time you unlock your phone, we can use the fingerprint. And because you set that up, we can then promise to whatever service. So if it's your bank or Amazon or whatever, we can say to that bank, like, hey, this person's fingerprint is the same one they set up initially. And Apple doesn't have it, and your bank doesn't have it, but your phone does. And on the one hand, if there's malware on your phone, if someone eventually breaks that, it's still scary, right? Like, it's still a fingerprint that's stored somewhere. But it's a lot less scary than Apple having like one database of all of our fingerprints. So I think the idea that our phones will get to know us really well and will know when we're the ones using them is a pretty cool idea that is like a nice hybrid, but still, not perfect.
I don't know. I don't even trust that Apple doesn't necessarily hold on to them. I mean, there have been so many different things where all these different computer companies are just forking over information to the NSA. I don't know. I don't really necessarily think that that's true. So the jury's still out in Tatiana land on that.
That's fair. I think that security researchers have verified that in the default state, like the iPhone is never sending fingerprint data. Like you can watch all the network data coming out of the phone from like your network packets, and we know that like fingerprints aren't leaving. That said, that doesn't mean that there's not somewhere in the iPhone a little switch that might say like, if this person is on some watch list, get their fingerprint and send it to the NSA, which is potentially scary, and you have every right not to trust them for that reason.
So what do you think about all that? I mean, do you think that, where do you think things are going to go? I mean, it seems like a lot of people are really interested in privacy, and other people are interested in the promises of safety in exchange for giving that up. So, where do you see things going?
I think about data, like personal data, a lot like oil. Like there was this moment when we like hit the ground, and all of a sudden this black goo spurted up. And we figured out like you can run your car with it, and you can build plastic with it, and you can do all these cool things with this chemical. And then 15 years later, 20 years later, 25 years later, 50 years later, we're like, oh shit, this stuff is like really dangerous, and burning it has consequences, and we have to be thoughtful, and we have to regulate this. But by the time we got there, we had a couple of companies that were really rich off of the oil. And so they made sure that they were excluded from all the regulations. So it's like no one new can use this stuff in harmful ways, but it's really hard to stop them from using it. And I think similarly, we're going to say, like, okay, companies can't keep collecting all this creepy stuff about us. We can't be like monitoring everyone's every move and keeping that like across thousands of services. But Google and Facebook are going to be really hard to beat. Like it's going to be really hard to take your data away from them. And so I think that one of the things that needs to happen is building tools, like I was saying earlier, that make it more possible to use the web privately. And today you could use Tor. You can use Tails, the operating system. There are these tools that exist that like are the first degree of like, if you really are serious about it and want to teach yourself and like spend a lot of time on it, you can be pretty anonymous. But most people have no idea how to use those things. Most people don't even know they exist. So then there's a question of like, okay, how do we build tools that like make people's lives easier, that they want to be using, that have sort of like a hybrid existence where they are both privacy tools and also tools that people like or want to use? And how do we get those out in the hands of people? And I think that's a process, but there are a bunch of exciting projects that people are working on. And I think like Clef is one piece of that puzzle. It gives people the ability to control encryption without understanding it. And that's like one big fundamental step towards privacy.
But it wouldn't be encrypted messaging services. It would just be the login would be encrypted, right?
Well, so what we do today is just the login encryption. But the fundamental thing is that Clef is giving every user a key and teaching them how to use it. And they don't need to know, like, this is a long number that's doing this sort of encoding. But what they do get is, like, there's this private key on the phone. It's being used to send something safely, a login in this case. And that's like one fundamental tool for the general problem. And like we're really focused on the problem of like logging you in because that's like a big problem that is applicable in a lot of places. But I think that tools like Clef or a future version of Clef that is expanded in its ambition, could do more of that.
Okay, one of the questions from the audience is Clef open source? And if not, then how can we know that Clef does not see any of our private data?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Clef isn't all open source. We were open source early on and got a bunch of people doing like these weird clone attacks where they would pretend to be Clef and they were like siphoning users or like in order to maliciously attack them. So it's not open source right now. It is like very sniffable. Like it's very easy for someone to do the same thing I was talking about earlier with Apple and see what information we're sending. We're also like our API is pretty well documented, so people can see like what's happening on our network. But it's not open source today because that just resulted in a bunch of like malicious activity.
What do you think have been some of the hardest things about having a company of your own? I'm assuming is this your first company?
This is my first company. Hardest things. Everything is hard. I think that the hardest thing is that every time I figure out how to solve a problem, I get 10 new problems. So we raised money from outside, like from venture capitalists. And when I was raising money, I thought, like, this is the hardest thing I'll ever do. Like, I have no idea how to do this. I have to go figure it out. I got to learn. I got to talk to a million people. And it was painful and hard. And I was like, when I finish fundraising, I'm going to get to go back and go build a company, like the thing I like to do. You know, the stuff that is really how I want to spend my time. And then we finished fundraising and was excited about it. But all of a sudden, I had the problem I needed to hire people. I was like, I had never hired people before. So now there was this whole question of like, how do I figure out who are the right people? How do I figure out what jobs I need to fill? How do I interview people? And then how do I convince them to come work on this like wild adventure with me? And so that was like a whole hard thing. That was a whole bunch of new challenges. And then as soon as we started hiring people, it was like, how do I manage? Like, I haven't been a manager for much time. You know, like, how do I keep all of these people happy? How do I keep them motivated? How do I keep them all aligned? And every step of the way, I've had the feeling like this is the hard thing. And once I figure it out, then I'll be set. And then as soon as I figure it out, there's a million new hard things. And I would say that that's like the most consistent challenge has been that there's no end point. Every time we fix one thing, there's now 10 new things that need fixing.
So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because, I mean, you keep growing, but it can be a little bit overwhelming, and then all of a sudden you're like, why didn't I just get a regular job?
Totally. It depends on which day you ask me. Some days it's my favorite thing about this. You know, that I've never been pushed harder. I've never worked so hard on something that, you know, it's really been a chance to like measure myself and get a feeling for my own limits and sort of expand those limits and feel like grow. I've never grown faster and I've never learned faster. Other days, it's exhausting. You know, the minute I feel excited about one accomplishment, there's also this new load on me, which makes it really hard. So, depends on the day.
Yeah, I think that that's the unusual thing about Bitcoin is that all these people are kind of entrepreneurs, and I don't know how many of us were necessarily prepared for that. I mean, I went to music school. They didn't teach us much about business. Right. I had, you know, a certain understanding, but going through the process of founding my own company and just, when we did Tatiana Coin, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. We're going to make a coin. And here it is a year later. And now we're finally using it and we have sort of a minimum viable product. And that's a really big accomplishment. But then as soon as we reached that, there were 100 million other things that I still had to do that I wasn't prepared to do. So it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I do think that it's rewarding.
Totally. By the way.
Yeah, you guys are based in San Francisco, right?
Oakland, but Bay Area, yeah.
Close enough. So what do you think about, does BitLicense affect how you do business in New York? And is there something in California that you think is going to be problematic for the way that you guys do business?
So for us, BitLicense isn't directly affecting us, and the most of the legislation around Bitcoin isn't affecting our sort of infrastructure. It doesn't make any of the stuff we do illegal. Some of the legislation actually mandates more stuff like what we do, but even still, I think that Bitcoin is in a period where the legislation that shakes out is like very important. Like if things like BitLicense end up winning out, Bitcoin companies are going to have a really hard time, and we're going to end up with like a couple of titans who can pay for that stuff, and then a bunch of like little companies that can't make it, which I think really is going to hurt the ecosystem. Or there's legislation that is going to regulate more responsibly and less generally, and that's going to help foster more people working on different things, which will lead to a more healthy ecosystem. For us, though, there is a national conversation about encryption happening, where law enforcement is saying, like, we need to be able to read every message that's sent in iMessage, and because it's encrypted, like, that's blocking us, and we need a universal backdoor. Like, we need to make sure that we can get into all encryption. And I think that's like the scariest, most dangerous conversation, not just for Clef, but for like internet privacy and security. Any backdoor that the U.S. government can use, everyone else can also use. I don't know if you saw the other day that Motherboard, I think, tweeted or like wrote a post about the TSA's universal keys, which can unlock all baggage locks, right? Like, I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, tell me, and maybe some people that are listening are not aware of that.
So if you lock your baggage when you fly, you have to have these special locks, and they have like a key that the TSA can like open the bag, and like be it like you have a key that you can unlock it with, or the TSA has a key and they can unlock it, and they're special locks, and the TSA has this like 5 keys that unlock all baggage locks, and I know it's pretty ridiculous. But Motherboard, I think, wrote an article about those keys, and for the header image, they put a picture of the 5 keys. And it turns out you can make a key from a picture of a key. And so they gave away all 5 keys publicly. And so now anyone who wants the keys to every baggage lock in the world can have them. And it's really like the idea of creating like a backdoor that will only be for the like good team like is totally ridiculous, because as soon as it gets out, we're all screwed. And so I think that this national conversation about encryption is like really dangerous and really scary, and also dangerous for Clef. It's, if we're not allowed to encrypt things, then Clef is not in a good position. But I'm hopeful that there are a lot of good people fighting that fight, and that we're gonna not have a universal backdoor to encryption. Hopefully.
Well, but why does the U.S. government get to make that decision? I mean, wouldn't they only be able to make that to the jurisdiction of their own citizens? I mean, can they really speak for everybody in the world?
No, they can only do it for their own citizens, but like Clef is a U.S.-based company, Google's a U.S.-based company, Facebook's a U.S.-based company, Apple's a U.S.-based company. Like, for the people whose companies are based here, they can make encryption illegal, which does a lot of damage, even if like I could leave the country and still do encryption. It would still be a major setback.
Do you think that it's because they are idiots that they don't understand that, or do you think that that's willful ignorance? I was actually trying to phrase that pleasantly, but I mean, aren't they aware of the same thing that you and I could figure it out, but they can't figure it out, or do they just not care, or what's the... I mean, obviously, I think that transparency is the enemy of the government in a lot of ways. They would love to have, peeks into everybody else's bedrooms, but their information, of course, is classified.
Yeah.
So I don't really, I guess I'm wondering what their public excuse is for this. Terrorism, is that it?
I think that policymakers who aren't technical are saying, like, hey, the police can't see this data they need to see in order to make arrests. Like, we need to find a way to make this data like accessible, right? And the possibility of making a golden key for the government is real, right? Every message that gets sent encrypted could also be encrypted with the government's key and stored and sent in such a way that only the government could read it with their one key. But the problem is, it's not like one copy of it. It's like a whole agency that has it, and if someone leaves, you got to make sure they don't take it with them, and that agency can never get hacked. So like, there's a problem. Police can't read the messages of criminals, and they want to. And there's a technical solution which is real, which is this like golden master key. But the policymakers who hear that, like, hey, we have a problem and there's a technical solution that is realistic, aren't then thinking about the technical fallout, right? Like, they don't have necessarily the background to understand, like, hey, technically it's possible, but it's also technically horrible and weakens every system that we depend on. So I think that there is some real ignorance there, but I also think that there are a lot of smart technical people who are also pushing for it because, the NSA wants everything, and so far they've gotten everything they've asked for.
I find that whole subject to be really disturbing, and I don't really know what we can do in order to put appropriate amounts of pressure. I don't feel that the government is very responsive to anything that's not what they want in the first place. So that's really kind of scary. Can Facebook, assuming that they ever would do this, which they wouldn't, but can Facebook tell the government, F off, leave us alone, we don't want to give you this information? Or would they face, I guess, lots of fines? Because that's what happened when the NSA was asking. Certain companies didn't want to volunteer the information, and they were getting smashed over it. So the whole subject just seems almost like you wouldn't want to fight the battle because there's just no point. Well, and is that where the circumvention of the system through technological advancement comes in?
Yeah, so one of the big things has been that the FISA courts, which are the I can't remember what the
secret courts.
Right, but are secret. So we can't see what's happening in them, and there's been so much bullying of these tech companies into giving up information that's secret, and they're not allowed to talk about it, and the courts never release those records. And I think that the NSA has access to this secret tool that has let them collect a ton of power without much check on them, and the real question is ending that capability, right? The things that need to be publicly debated and decided, it's much harder to make these sort of ridiculous requests. It's really hard to get Congress to pass a public bill which requires backdoor encryption for everyone versus getting a FISA court to sign an order that makes these companies do something secretly. And so I think that the big thing, and there are a bunch of, the Fight for the Future is the group that I follow most closely that's working on this stuff, that are really fighting the ability of those courts more than they are fighting the specific outcomes, because it's as long as they continue to exist, it's really hard to make progress.
I don't know. This stuff depresses me. I feel like we're screwed. I don't think that this was the point of the interview to come up with that conclusion that our entire society is underwater, but I don't think that that's anything new for the people that are listening to this. So, what are you going to do? What's new on the horizon for Clef? Because you guys are about to make a big announcement.
Yeah, on Thursday we have a big announcement that I'll give up. But
I thought it was tomorrow, but I like that we're getting the scoop.
Right, you're getting the scoop. It's Thursday. Fingers crossed. There's still a couple of little things to get, make sure the launch goes smoothly. But Bitfinex will be rolling out Clef integration, which I am just super excited about. Bitfinex, does the highest volume of USD trades for Bitcoin. They've just they're a company that's pretty paranoid about security and really have put a lot of thought into it. And we've just been working with do something really new and cool. So they're really big. They're an exciting customer. I think that they're gonna them rolling Clef out is a really strong statement of support for us. I'm really excited to have them on board. But B, we've also built something new for them, which we're calling distributed auth, which is super exciting also. So normally, when you log in with Clef, we verify all the crypto stuff, and then we just pass off to the site hey, Tatiana logged in. And they trust us. And cool, if Clef says it, it's probably true. Which is fine for most people. They don't know how to do cryptography themselves, and they would rather us do it, and we're really good at it, so it's okay. But for some websites, they're good at their own crypto. And so what we're doing now is giving them also a copy of the public key, your public key. And that means they get to verify themselves that it's really you. So they don't have to trust that were right, they can also like go through the whole process themselves. And that's just really exciting from a sort of expansion of the tool perspective. It gives us like a whole new level of trust and sort of like security, because now even if Clef is totally compromised and we are taken over by pirates who are sending bad logins all over the world, like still the Bitfinex users are going to be safe. And if Bitfinex is totally compromised and loses everything in their database, you're still safe. Someone has to completely compromise both of us in order to compromise a user account, which is the right way to do things. Like that's really exciting. So that's coming on Thursday, and I am very stoked about it.
Very cool. So I'm about to bring on our second guest. I'm really glad that we got a chance to chat. So just to review, because I know that at one of the conferences I downloaded Clef, and I'm getting a new phone soon, so I'm going to put it back on there. How do I do it again, just for people at home that want to try it out? So they download the app, and then what do they do? One more time.
Yeah, so you can go to demo.getclef.com if you just want to try it out, or if you go to any number of sites who have integrated it. Bitfinex on Thursday, but Paxful or Satoshi Tango, or there's a whole list that is in the app. So if you download the app, it'll tell you places you can use it. But download the app for Android or iPhone. It's in the App Store or the Google Play Store. It's called Clef, C-L-E-F, or you can check it out at getclef.com.
Cool. And your Twitter is also GetClef, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm going to be in San Francisco next week, so I hope that we get a chance to meet up, and that'll be fun, because I heard you guys have some cooking nights. I'm not going to make it to the cooking night. I have an Airbits panel thing, but we'll definitely have to get together, and then I think I'm going to hold off on working with my Clef until I see you, and then I'll just force you to teach me how to do it. And then I'll report back to everybody. I'll let everybody know if it was as easy as it was when I first tried it out. But okay, so everybody, if you want to get your Clef, go to getclef.com. Thank you very much for joining me today, B. And yeah, we'll be airing this on Let's Talk Bitcoin too, so that'll be fun. All right, thanks very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so our next guest, everybody, is Jeremiah Rounds. And Jeremiah and I met because he was making a movie with a few other people about Liberty. And he's including a whole bunch of different characters from the Liberty movement that I got to know during the Ron Paul campaign. And thanks for joining me today, Jeremiah.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. So why don't you give people a little bit of a feedback on what you've been working on, and how did you get involved in Liberty?
So, I'm sorry. Yeah, the whole project came about when Neil Rademacher, the director, contacted me a few months ago, and kind of wanted some technical assistance with part of it. And as I started getting a feel for what the project was, I just got more and more involved. And so eventually, we came and filmed the portion that you were able to be a part of, and the goal of the film is to kind of expose to the world the Liberty movement, beginning with the Ron Paul campaigns in 2008 and 2012, and kind of bring people up to speed on what went down there, because not everyone knows what happened at the RNC and all the shady stuff that was going on then, and then kind of bring everybody up to speed on where we're at now and what people are doing for Liberty right now, and then kind of point forward to a future where and see what our options are for increasing freedom and liberty in America and the world.
Okay, so basically you guys are doing a crowd sale right now in order to fulfill the expenses that it's going to take in order to put out the movie?
Yep, that's correct. We're on Kickstarter right now. So if you go to kickstarter.com and just look for Liberty Documentary, we'll pop right up there. And right now our goal is it's a $50,000 campaign, and that's pretty low for a film, especially when we're doing so much traveling. But we really just wanted to cover our expenses. No one's really getting much pay out of this. We're just getting our travel expenses covered, equipment rentals, insurance, and you know, food and lodging and stuff like that, because we're going to be taking a 30-day road trip essentially, and meeting up with as many people in the movement as we can to get the perspectives of people who are, you know, everything from anarchists to statists who are willing to work within the system and try and further liberty through, you know, the voting method, and see how that works. So Kickstarter is our chosen method, and we're going to be running that until October 11th. We started on September 11th, and kind of a symbolic day when a lot of our liberties were beginning to be eroded. And on October 11th, we'll be in New York at Liberty Fest, and that's where we're going to wrap things up.
Okay, cool. So who have you interviewed so far?
Well, the interviews that we've got so far have mainly been for the just the trailer bit that we have, and we may do some reshoots of that too. But we were at our first set of interviews with Jeffrey Phillips from We Are Change, yourself, and Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center, I believe it's called.
Yep, 10th Amendment Center.
And then we went down to Phoenix and met with Ernest Hancock from Freedom's Phoenix, and Barry Hess, who has been running for governor there as a libertarian candidate. And then we were able to go to the Jackalope Freedom Fest, which was a really cool experience for me. I've never actually, I wasn't able to go to Pork Fest or anything like that, so this was kind of my first exposure to spontaneous order and living agorism and things like that. So it was a really cool experience, and we talked with a bunch of people there.
You know, I was thinking about Liberty and, you know, my own transition to Bitcoin more, and the way that kind of played out was I was singing for the Ron Paul movement, and I was super on Team Ron Paul. And I truly believed that was going to be the answer. You know, I thought that we could make it happen because there were so many different people coming to all these different events, and there was, you know, thousands of people in the street, and there was such a feeling of hope. And then after I saw what happened at the RNC, and I mean, I can't say that I wasn't a little bit disappointed that Ron didn't keep kind of pushing onward. I felt that we could have kind of pushed the envelope a little bit. And with the whole Rand supporting Mitt Romney, I mean, it really killed the spirit. And all of these events that I had been going to were empty. And people were depressed, the people that were there, because they felt like their activities were just, they didn't really have a point. What do you think about the state of the liberty movement since 2012? I feel like there's been a lot of bickering, and I think a lot of more attention has gone to Bitcoin, but I think that a lot of people in liberty don't necessarily believe in Bitcoin. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of loss of faith in the system, which I think is inevitable when you realize that the system is rigged, you know. And I think, at least for me personally, I was pretty sure it was rigged, and I was pretty sure that we didn't have a chance, but I was willing to try it anyway for Ron, and you know, I became a Republican. I registered Republican so I could be a delegate and support him here in Nevada, and so. Yeah, I mean, I was pretty sure it was rigged, and then the RNC went down, and it was just blatantly obvious. And so I think for a lot of people, that was a disappointing moment, and a lot of people kind of dropped out, but a lot of people picked up the reins and moved on. And I think there's a lot of hope. I mean, I kind of dropped out of the movement, honestly. I wasn't following a lot of the people. So for me myself, this is an eye-opening experience just in doing these interviews and experiencing this. I'm almost like not quite a mainstream audience that would be encountering this, but not nearly as depth as probably most of your listeners are. And so for me, it's been really exciting to see what people are doing and how people are taking responsibility and the things that they're doing in all different all different ways. I mean, you mentioned that there's a lot of bickering and infighting in the movement, and I think that's true. But at the same time, there's a lot of people doing a lot of different stuff, and I think if we can realize that there's a place, as Ernie Hancock said, as long as there's room for my plan, we're cool. And I think that's what a lot of people need to realize is we're going to do things differently, and that's okay. There's many options, and our film is kind of going to be exploring those options. And I think we'll end up with a consensus of where the movement's going, and hopefully get some ideas of what's best. And not necessarily that there's one perfect plan. Like we should all just forget everything we're doing and go, stand with Rand or something. But just the idea that there are options and we can work together in our own separate ways, and I think that's cool. And one of the ways that we're kind of promoting that is our film is obviously we're going to have a finished movie, an hour and a half, 2 hours long, but we're also going to be releasing all of the interviews and their entirety. So, if whoever we interview ends up being on there for a couple minutes in the finished film, but it strikes a chord with someone, they can go to our site and watch that entire interview and hear everything that they had to say in context. And it's really important to us to have that kind of openness so that it's, we can't be accused of twisting someone's words or anything like that.
Do you think that Rand Paul has a chance?
I don't honestly know. I mean, I could be wrong, and I'd be okay with being wrong. But I think he's he's not different enough to stand out on either end. He's different enough to be for both sides to not really care, And I think that's the problem. If he had followed closer to his dad's politics, I think he could have made a big difference. But when you start compromising on little issues to try and get more people interested, you lose your core audience. And the people that would have stood by him no matter what are kind of like, but you just supported this thing that we're totally against. So, and then the mainstream Republican crowd is like, oh, you're Ron Paul's son. Oh, that guy, we can't have any of that crazy talk. So I kind of think his message is getting diluted by trying to play both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that. I mean, I kind of feel bad for him because he gets torn to shreds by libertarians because he's not libertarian enough, and the libertarian Nazis, God forbid. I think he's a lot better than some other people, but yeah, I'm also a little bit disappointed on certain other fronts. Do you think that we need a leader? Because even though the message is liberty, I do personally think that there needs to be a certain amount of leadership, and maybe that's where we've been falling behind.
I think leaders can be very beneficial. It's always nice because not everyone is an extroverted personality that can go out there and stomp the streets and win people over. But I think putting your faith in a leader can be dangerous because, as human beings, we're just kind of prone to messing things up. And like you said, the libertarian audience, when we see someone make a mistake or compromise on some issue, we'll tear them apart. And, everyone else does that too. So I think you're bound to make a mistake at some point, and if you get torn down, then a lot of damage can happen because of the people that are following you to that extent. So I think maybe a better solution is leadership on a more small scale, I guess. It's good to have figureheads and people to look up to, but relying on them to make the change you want to see is dangerous, I think.
Yeah, I just don't think that people are necessarily all that interested in personal responsibility or are even naturally inclined to be making those decisions. I mean, that's kind of like a jerky thing to say. I don't mean it in a disparaging way. I just don't think that not everybody's going to take charge of the crowd and say, okay, this is what we should do. Some people just want to be in a supporting role, I think, and I don't know. I miss that. I miss the Ron Paul thing, how we had somebody to look up to and somebody to be a hero. And, as you go along and you get to hear more of the stories of the history of libertarianism, whatever, you become a little bit disillusioned. But I like that people rallied around him. I find it very disturbing that people are rallying behind Bernie Sanders. I don't understand that. I mean, I know he's offering everybody free stuff, and for somebody with a more liberal background, maybe they can believe that. But for people that are libertarian, like, did they not listen to Bob Murphy ever talk about economics? I don't even understand where the disconnect is. Why do you think that people support Bernie Sanders, and what do you think? What do you think of Bernie Sanders? Anything?
I think he's interesting. He says interesting things. He's definitely different from a lot of the other, Democrats out there. But I think what it's a sign of is people are looking for something different. I mean, on both sides. Donald Trump, he's, whatever you want to say about him, he's different. He's not the same old thing. And I think Bernie Sanders is the same way. It's like people are I think are subconsciously realizing that the system as it is not working. And so they're looking for something different. And these candidates pop up and they're a little bit different. They're not hugely different, but they're different enough for people to take notice. And I mean, we're kind of honestly, that's why we're trying to get this film done so quickly right now. I mean, if we don't make our funding goal, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep pushing forward until it's done, but it might take a year to get it completed. And by then, maybe people aren't going to be so much interested in a different point of view, because right now is the prime time to hit. Everybody's excited. Everybody is emotional. You can't go anywhere without hearing somebody saying something about politics. There's a lot of hot issues. And when you make a film that addresses those issues and speaks to that in an environment where it's so prevalent and already people are open to that, I think we stand a real chance at opening people up to different ideas. And people who may not have considered, 2 years ago, may not have paid libertarian ideals at the second glance, but because of the environment and what's going on with the elections and how eager they are to hear something different, I think that's where we can really hit home with them and give them some hope that, hey, you can go with one of these people, but honestly, they're not the change you're looking for. And maybe we can open up their minds to something a little bit more, I mean, obviously a lot different from what they're used to.
Yeah, I hope that that the film does well. I think that reaching people on an emotional level and from a creative place is generally a lot more effective. I was even talking about an artist coin concept with someone earlier today at lunch, and I was saying that, if Taylor Swift had an artist coin, that would do more for Bitcoin than most of the Bitcoin businesses out there, period, because people love Taylor Swift, and whatever Taylor Swift says they should do, they just blindly follow along. They don't even go 2 steps further. They're just like, whatever she says, which is in itself sort of a disturbing state of human affairs.
It is.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not really too crazy about Bernie. I think that it's like if you're eating cheeseburgers from McDonald's every single day, yes, a chicken sandwich from Burger King is going to be different and you're going to be really super excited, but that doesn't make it, a steak from a really good restaurant. They're all like, it's still fast food. It's still really bad for you. So I don't know, but I think it's also hard to get money from people, especially for these kinds of campaigns. I think people have been really tapped out. People spent so much money on the Ron Paul campaign, and that really upsets me because all of that money going toward that campaign, while I unbelievably appreciate the education that a lot of us got with the momentum that was behind Ron Paul, and that was in large part due to the amount of money that was donated, I wonder if that wouldn't have been better spent in a slightly more spread out kind of way instead of putting all of our cash eggs in one basket, because now even though people want to support something, they don't have the money. It's like the economy is even worse than it was back then, and people feel really dejected. I almost feel bad for Rand. because nobody wants to give him money anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they necessarily should. I personally, people ask me, they say, who are you voting for? I'm like, why would I bother wasting my time on that? All I think about is decentralized solutions, because to me, I learned that there were so many problems in the government, in not even in voting, but in terms of law enforcement, in terms of, you know, judges and stuff like that. I mean, justice is completely out the window. All these things that you have an illusion about when you're growing up, that you think, oh, the police are there to help me, and if something goes wrong, I'll go to court, and it'll be just like Ally McBeal, and not only will I win, but I'll look extremely good while I do. So, you know, there's all these fantasies that you get from television, just like you think you know what war is, you think you know what jail is, you think you know what crime is, you think you know what criminals are, and all of those things keep falling away. And I'm encouraged that people are looking for solutions, but I think to really go down the rabbit hole properly and to the point where they're really truly awake, it is a little bit of a process. And it's scary out there these days. I don't know when the economy is going to collapse, but I foresee that happening at some point. And will we be prepared? And will people ask for more regulation, more from the government, not realizing that the government is the one that's causing these problems? Look at how everybody's like, Obama's so great, he let out the prisoners. Well, they wouldn't be in jail if he didn't have these policies in the first place. It's like thanking Hitler for sparing a couple extra people. Like,
yeah, he didn't change any of the policies that put him there in the first place.
Exactly.
So repeal all the laws, that'd be good. You know, that'd be something good. But
yeah,
no, I agree.
And I think that there's a lot of race baiting right now, where, not to say that there aren't very serious racial issues in this country, but statistically, there are things that are very contradictory to the doom and gloom that you would see shown on the air. And I hate that it makes people divided. And I think that people end up seeing one color as the enemy, but I don't really think that the enemy is a color. I think of the enemy as the person with the gun that says, I'm the government. And not that all governments are bad, but just morally it's inconsistent to say that, oh, well, this government is good and this one is bad, because on the whole they're just thieving. Although I don't really think that we're going to find too many people on Liberty.me that disagree with that. The Let's Talk Bitcoin audience is pretty liberty-minded, and if they're not, I apologize if my politics is offending anyone. But that's just the way that I feel, and as an artist, I've always really wanted to unify people and to educate people. I took so much from John Lennon, or Bob Dylan, or all these singer-songwriters from the 60s and the 70s that were speaking to people about changing things, and I think that that's really incumbent on artists especially. So I guess that counts for you guys with the movie too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for me, even when I'm not doing documentary stuff, because I do a lot of narrative films with just traditional popcorn movie type stuff, but whenever I write something or direct something, I always want it to have some message that will make people think about something, and with the Liberty documentary, it's pretty easy because this stuff is, we can just, slap it on the table and say, take a look at it, whereas, some of those messages are a little more hidden in some of the other forms. But I think artists have a really special place because they can touch people's hearts and minds at the same time. If you're reading a book, that's one thing. You can process information, or, you can experience something visceral and get an emotional sensation from it. But with music, with film, and theater, things like that, where you kind of get both. You get the emotional experience and you get information passed on. And I think that's really one of the most powerful things that you can do to change someone's mind, is show them something. I mean, look at a documentary like Blackfish. What that did. I mean, whether you agree with it or not, or whatever. The fact is, people watched that movie, passed it on to their friends, and SeaWorld suffered for it. You know what I mean? So films have this ability that when if it resonates with you, if the message strikes home, you want to share that with your friends. And I mean, when we're done, it's going to be on Netflix, it's going to be on iTunes, and and Amazon, and you'll be able to pass it on to your friends and say, man, I just saw this thing and kind of opened my eyes to some new stuff, and I think you should take a look. And when you pass that on and people watch it, it really can cause change on that level. And so that's what we're striving for, is to change people's hearts and minds and realize that you don't have to go to a government to get your rights. Rights don't come from governments. The government should exist to defend those rights, but if you're looking for them to give them to you, it's not going to happen,
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty appalled at the state of artistic affairs out there. I really miss hearing music on the radio that has some sort of meaning.
Yeah.
And a lot of people tell me, oh, well, first of all, a lot of people are completely clueless about the music industry. They think if you write one song and you dance around in your underwear, then of course you're going to be famous the next day, as if that's like a real legitimate solution. But I don't know. I wish that when I listened to the radio that there was something of substance out there. And I think that if I were the government, I would have realized the power that music has a long time ago. I was watching this Nina Simone documentary, and my God, it was so good. And she was such a shit-talking maniac. I mean, she was really, she was violent. She was all black power. And, you see the circumstances leading up to where she was. I could understand her frustration. I could understand her anger. And I could feel it when I would hear her sing. And that feeling is really transferable, and I don't think that you're limited by education or even language. You can tell what somebody's singing about, even if you don't know what they're singing about, because you just feel it on this deeper level. And I think the arts are just so important to the world, and it's so disappointing when they're not necessarily out there. What are you guys going to do in order to get the word out in terms of marketing?
For the film or for the Kickstarter?
Well, for the film, even once it gets funded, let's hope that it gets funded, right? And either way, you guys are going to keep doing it. But how do you compete with companies that have $1 million budgets just for marketing alone? How do you get the word out there? Is it just a matter of word of mouth, and we just have to wait for that tipping point?
That'll happen on its own. But yeah, we have a pretty extensive plan. Not all of it is finalized yet, but I mean, we're going to do the traditional festival route and things like that you normally promote films on. But a big part of what we're doing that's different is the platform that we're going to be launching. And I can't say a whole lot about it until it launches, but it will be, I believe, in October. We'll be able to say more about it when it goes up. But it's going to be really cool. It's going to be a place where people can interact, and again, because of this hot button climate that we're in right now with the political season, that's really going to be what pushes our film. Because when people have a chance, I mean, the internet, people react. That's what they do. They watch something, they react, they think about it later. And I think there's a way to utilize that in a positive way to spread new ideas. And so we're creating a whole new platform that will be using video and as a means of spreading information like that, and doing it in a way that's fast. It's not going to be, something happens and then a week later you've got something. It's as soon as it happens, it can go up and we can respond to that and give solutions and get input from people and get their participation in it, so it's not just a passive medium anymore.
Yeah, there seems to be a really big push in general with the arts to connect more with the fan base. I think you guys are onto something there. So where can people donate, and where can people find out more?
Since I'm addressing a crowd that probably is familiar with Bitcoin a bit more than some of our other audiences, you can go directly to our website, libertydocumentary.com, and you can donate there with there's a link there to our Kickstarter campaign, and there's also a Bitcoin and PayPal where you can donate directly.
Donating directly, just for the record, everybody, is better, because the other outlets take a percentage, or is that not
True.
good? Because
No,
then
that's
you.
true.
Okay.
Well, it's true. Yeah, it's kind of true and not true. It's true because you're absolutely right. They don't take any percentage. But, I mean, even donating $1 to the Kickstarter campaign, if all of our listeners did just $1, I mean, we would make our funding in no time, and that would be fantastic. But even so, if you donate on Bitcoin and you choose to do that, we would really appreciate it passing it on. Copy the link and throw it on your Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and help us. I think once you see the trailer, I find it to be pretty inspiring. And I think watch the trailer, leave honest feedback, like us on Facebook where it's Liberty Documentary Film, and just check out what we have to say. And if you agree with it, repost it, retweet it, and just passing that word along has been very beneficial to us so far, and I think it's always going to be. It's something where if people hear from you, if people who know you hear from you and you say that this is something that's interesting to you, that's more powerful than me paying, Google or Facebook or some other company to put that in their feed and direct marketing like that. It's a lot more powerful when you hear from someone who enjoys something and they pass it on than if it just kind of shows up randomly. So that's really important to us is promotion. And if you like our page, we'll like you back too. So it's kind of we're into cross promoting and helping each other out, because I think that's the only way the Liberty movement is ever going to get anywhere, is if people help each other out and support each other. Even if you disagree on certain issues, we're all in it to have more freedom. So if we can agree on that, then how we go about doing that, it's okay to have conversations about the benefits and merits of different ways of doing that. But if you throw out the whole thing just because you have a little disagreement about this little 10% difference in our ideology, when there's 90% of the things that we totally are 100% the same on, I think it's really damaging, and whereas it could be we agree with most things and we'll go for it. And I think that's what makes a lot of the times what makes so strong the Republicans and Democrats is they don't really care, all the issues, as long as most of them are kind of in line with what the traditional thing is, they'll support any candidate. If they're a Democrat, they'll support any Democrat. If they're Republican, when I was at the convention in Reno, they said, well, if Ron Paul gets the nomination, yeah, we'll vote for him because he's Republican. It's not our favorite Republican, but we'd vote for him no matter what. Aren't you going to do that with Mitt Romney? And we were like, no, we don't believe in him. And they were just shocked that, well, I thought you were Republicans. Like, no, we're voting for an ideal, not just a color. It's not red or blue for us. It's the real thing. So.
Well, I think that instilling something to believe in for people, and if that is the Liberty message, I think that that's really cool. And then maybe we can go and find those Bernie Sanders people and be like, you've got a lot of things right, except for a few things about, economics.
A few major things.
Well, I came from the left. I loved Dennis Kucinich in 2008. I liked Ron Paul, but some of the things I was like, why doesn't this guy like the EPA? What kind of weirdo doesn't care about the environment? But eventually when I learned about how money works and how good intentioned projects oftentimes have the opposite effect of what their intentions were, that kind of brought me over. So maybe there's hope, and maybe we can find some common ground. So there's usually a secret phrase, and I think that that's what we should make it for the LTB audience, common ground.
Common ground.
Yeah, that'll be the phrase for today. Normally I let you choose, but I'm not letting you choose anything today. I'm feeling
no, I like it.
I think it's good though, right? It kind of reminds people to find places where they do connect. Sometimes I meet with people that are in the banking industry, and honestly, I genuinely mean it. I think that I can bring those people over to some of the things that I believe in, and I think I can learn a lot from their perspective. Yeah, I don't think everybody who works in the banking industry is an evil monster. I think that they think that they're trying to do the right thing. So if we can be compassionate toward one another, which isn't always easy,
but it's really important. It really is, because it's not arguing and being right and yelling at people that wins their hearts. It's compassion saying, I know what you're doing. You really want to help people. Like, I don't think Democrats want to steal from everyone and with taxes and stuff like that. They really like the people who are supportive of Obamacare and all that. It's because they really believe that in helping people. It's not, they're not doing it out of, I mean, most of them, I guess, aren't doing it out of any evil intention. They just want to help, sick people who can't afford it, and that's not a bad thing to want. So I think reaching people on that level and agreeing that that's a good thing, but pointing out how that actually is counterproductive to what they're hoping to accomplish. When you come at it with that common ground first, then you can approach the things that you might differ on, and I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. So keep the hope alive. So one more time, where can people find you?
LibertyDocumentary.com and Kickstarter.com, and just search for Liberty Documentary and you will find us. And please pass us on. Please donate if you can, and just help us spread the word. Watch the video and tell us what you think. Tell us what we can improve, and we'd love to hear from you.
What's the Twitter handle? I know a lot of people are on Twitter.
Oh man, it's Liberty Doc Film, I believe.
Okay, cool, perfect. All right, well, thank you so much for coming on. I want an update about the show, or rather the film, and I hope you guys find something useful from what I had to say in there. We've got a couple of things going on in Liberty.me. We've got at 10 p.m. we've got Walter Block, question and answers. And then Julie Borowski is interviewing Austin Peterson, who is now candidate for the LP nomination for presidency. I'm not really sure when that's going to be on, but Julie's really funny. I really like her a lot. And then at the end of the week, we're hosting a very special show where we're going to be watching another really great documentary that I think is opening minds and hearts out there, called The Deep Web. It's about my friend Ross Ulbricht. I actually went to visit him in prison a couple months ago, and I haven't really talked about that. So I'm going to share that story with everybody. We also have, I think, Alex Winter, the director of the film, hopefully should be able to make it. We're working on that. So it's going to be me, JT, which is I call Jeffrey Tucker, and hopefully Alex, and, of course, all the Liberty.me audience. So if you're around on Friday night and you want to be a nerd and watch documentaries with us, everybody check out Liberty.me. And if you're listening to this on Let's Talk Bitcoin, thanks for checking out the show. And I am not sure if we're going to have the show next week because there's a lot of travel coming up, but I've got some fun ideas for guests and stuff. So stay tuned. TatianaMoroz.com, CryptoMediaHub.com if you need any advertising or PR to the Bitcoin space. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks to B. Thanks to Liberty.me and LTB. And I will see you all later. Thanks. Have a good night. Bye.